So within that, it was kind of in the afterglow of this great victory and all, it was kind of like thinking back to what William Madutai was saying, is that, yeah, what's the lesson here? You know, people say, oh yeah, we got this thing, but how do people actually, what are the real lessons here? And so then, during this time, after 1988, we in NCR began hearing of people who've been denied redress. But it's hard to really publicize, try to get support for them, because the mindset in a lot of people's, in the Japanese American community at least, was that, hey, we won. You know, we won. So what do you guys, you know, it's kind of like they couldn't really hear what we're saying in some ways. I mean, some people came out in support, but it's really hard when that was the sensibility in the community, was that we have won, we had won, so, you know, what are you guys talking about? So it was in the context of that we met Grace. She came, you know, she talked to us down here, say, can we form this organization, Campaign for Justice? And so we did. Grace with the Japanese Proven Oral History Project, along with the Japanese American Citizens League, and the Southern California chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union, we formed Campaign for Justice. And then our first action was to file this lawsuit, Mochizuki versus United States. And so as Grace mentioned, in 1998, there was a settlement where this was the last year of the life of the Civil Liberties Act. It was, you know, had 10 years to do its business. And so if things were winding down, and so we were negotiating with the Department of Justice, and so they said, they just, you know, figured out, okay, we got this much money left over from, you know, the Civil Liberties Public Education Fund. So it came out to $5,000 per Japanese Latin American. And so we had a really intense meeting. We had to discuss, are we gonna take this offer? And I remember Carmen Mochizuki, for whom the settlement, the lawsuit was named, and Alice Nishimoto, who were two key members of Campaign for Justice, former JLA former internees. They were really conflicted because they worked so hard on this. But it was kind of like, they said if it had been up to them, just for them personally, they would not accept it. And a lot of people, the JLAs who were then in Latin America, who were able to get back to Latin America, said, no, don't take it. And the reason we did accept it for the most part was that Fred Okren, who was part of Campaign for Justice, and this guy, he defended Japanese Americans during World War II. He was an old-time ACLU guy down in Southern California. He was still defending Japanese Americans, Japanese Latin Americans here in 1998. He said, well, this is a major victory because the Japanese Latin Americans who were deported to Japan would win this measure of redress. Because it was a victory because Japanese American former inmates who were 21 years of age or older and were part of this hostage exchange, who went to Japan, were denied redress. We in NCR were able to fight for the minor relocatees, so-called relocatees, people who were under the age, and they, you know, the court said, well, yeah, they were too young to be, they had to follow their parents and all, so they were too young to be able to make their own judgment to go. So we were able to win redress for them. But those who were 21 years of age or older who went to Japan, Japanese Americans, did not receive the redress. So Fred said, hey, this is a major victory. And so that kind of pushed us to accept the $5,000. But I remember for me, I voiced this opinion that it's kind of back to this thing of what are the lessons learned, and if this gets into the American history books, what are the books going to say? And they're going to say maybe, well, Japanese Latin Americans also won their redress. They won't say it was 1/4 of what Japanese Americans received. So this kind of very bittersweet quality to what happened with the 1998 settlement. But as Grace pointed out, we're able to hook up with Congressman Javier Becerra, and he was great, but we weren't able to really get much traction. So from 2001 to 2007, it was a really tough period for us in Campaign for Justice. And I remember reporting back to at NCR meetings saying, you know, we're blowing on burning embers here, you know, because barely had our pulse. But, you know, I'll get back to that in just a second. But in terms of what we've learned, you know, thinking back, I think it was around 2007, a little bit before, you know, September 11th. I think there was a poll taken of American people. Remember, this is around 2000, which is, you know, 12 years after the passage of the Civil Liberties Act, and people, you know, the whole thing about the Civil Liberties Act and the bit of money we got $5 million from the original Public Education Fund to develop educational programs, projects to educate the American public about what happened. So we're able to develop some education around that. But this poll, I think it was around 2000, asked Americans, what do you know about what happened during World War II to Japanese Americans? And I think it was about 30% said, yeah, I know something, you know. So you think, 2,000, 30%, that's not good, you know, just in terms of people who knew something about what happened during World War II. So anyway, then of course came September 11, 2001. And I think at that time, I felt, okay, what kinds of lessons are we learning and all? I think at that time, there was some incremental change you could see from the redress movement in that Norman Mineta, of course, at that time was Secretary of Transportation, and he made it very clear what had happened to him as a child, as a young man, and said that, hey, I don't want to see this happen to Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, or Southeast Asian Americans. And I think the Japanese American community really came out strongly to say, we know what happens during these times of crisis and all, and we support our fellow Americans, Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, Southeast Asian Americans. We know what we went through, and we don't want that same kind of thing to happen. So I think with that, you could see some incremental improvement in terms of, yeah, we have learned something from what happened during World War II. So here we are today, and I think it's great to see all of you out here, because as I say, from 2001, 2007, you would have thought we were dead on the vine. We're like, woo, not much happening. But you're all here, and this past year, through Christine O, who was on the staff of Congressman Javier Becerra, she's been the staff director for Campaign for Justice during this past year, has done an amazing job getting younger folks involved and all, and we feel a great amount of life and feel, yeah, there's hope for, you know, getting redress equity for Japanese Latin Americans. And then we have young people like Craig here, and Craig has really worked hard this past year as well. So we're kind of reviving this effort to win redress equity for Japanese Latin Americans, to win dignity and redemption for them. So, you know, in terms of what are the lessons learned, I think it's like, well, there's nothing magical about it. It's like, it's never ending, you never give up, we've got to be constantly vigilant, and so we're all here, and I hope we can all, you know, really support each other, and maybe finally we'll win some measure of redress equity for Japanese Latin Americans.
That's so true.